Amani na upendo. That's peace and love, brothers and sisters of direct African or Alkebulan ancestry, ladies and gentlemen, in the listening audience. I'm Brother Mwanga Sadaka Mantu Nemsayu, and at this time I won't get into that name unless I have to, but that's not a so-called Christian name, and it's not a so-called Muslim name. That name is Mwanga Sadaka Mantu Nemsayu. And I'm happy to have you tune in, as this is our first episode of Renew Your Mind. Renew Your Mind. And this is an introductory episode, and the primary purpose of Renew Your Mind is to enlighten minds, empower, enrich, encourage, and transform as many lives as possible for the better. And we're here, as I always like to say, here in the backwoods, muddy waters, sugar ditches, mosquito swamps, dirt roads, railroad tracks, yellow fever cemetery, mockingbirds, sugar cane, rattlesnake plantations, and other very strange fruits hanging and swinging back and forth from the magnolia trees of Greenville and Delta, Mississippi. And as I stated, this is our first episode of Renew Your Mind. And you may wonder, like, what is that, renew your mind? I mean, I know you have heard it before. As a matter of fact, I know many of you are very familiar with the book of Romans. I think it's the 12th chapter, 1st and 2nd verse, where it says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I always like to add to that, without distracting from the verse, be not conformed to the ways and patterns of the world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And the key word to me that stands out is renew your mind. How do you renew the mind? Why do I need to renew my mind or our mind? I mean, you just think about it. And as a people, so-called black people, and it may apply to humanity in general, but specifically to so-called black people, or African descent, as we like to say, our minds have been damaged. Our minds have been twisted, and they are in dire need of being untwisted. I mean, and you just think about it, most of our behavior, our speech, and how we relate to one another what's determined by what's happening in our mind. So if we never renew the mind, then we'll continue to get just what we're getting, and that's not enough. We need betterment. We need a more enlightened mind. So in a nutshell, the purpose of this program is to, as I stated a minute ago, is to enlighten minds, empower people, enrich and transform as many lives for the better. And matter of fact, there won't be no personal or self-transformation without the renewing of the mind. And a mind is renewed with accurate knowledge and truth and information. Just like you may renew a house, you take out the old boards and woods and so forth and so on, and you replace them with a better board, a better wood, a better wall. That's renewing that house. So in this sense, in a mental and psychological, from a mental and psychological perspective, the mind is renewed with accurate knowledge, truth, and information. And matter of fact, also, when you look at renew the mind, that's like synonymous with being born again. You and I are not physically going back into our mother's womb and being born again. So when we read that biblical passage or verse, it's not talking about a physical rebirth. There's a physical transformation, but the second birth or the spiritual birth is a renewing of the mind. So in a nutshell, at this time, with this first episode or introductory episode, we want to focus on renewing the mind. We need a new understanding. We need accurate knowledge. We need truth. We need the historical information. Because that historical information or knowledge is what's going to wake us up. It's the key to the renewing of the mind. And most of us may say like, oh, okay, there's nothing wrong with my mind. We in denial when we say that, matter of fact. And just think about Dr. Carter G. Woodson wrote a book in 1933 called The Miseducation of the So-Called Negro. And that book is still in print and still relevant for today. He called it The Miseducation of the So-Called Negro. We as a people, not only have we been miseducated, and people in general have been miseducated and socially engineered, our mentalities has been socially engineered, been conditioned by the culture that we live in and by the institutions that we interact with day in and day out since childhood up into adulthood, and it continues. So we need to question how what Dr. King called the courage of conviction, the courage to challenge the content of our thinking, the content of the information that's already inside this brain, the content of the information that we allow day in and day out to penetrate within ourselves, to penetrate our brain and become a part of our consciousness. We need to look at that. We need to look at that. And so this is what this program is all about, is entitled that we're using today, Renewing the Mind. Renewing the Mind. And we intend to look at suppressed historical information, suppressed and twisted religious information, knowledge and truth. I mean, suppressed economic information, suppressed and twisted political, social, cultural information. As a matter of fact, today is January the 9th, and we just come out of Kwanzaa, that's relevant to so-called black people in America and throughout the world. And Kwanzaa itself was from December the 26th to January the 1st, and it deals with 7 principles, and that's centered around 7 calendars. But what I'm alluding to, the creator of that, I don't like to call it a holiday, because it's not just a holiday. It's really a social cultural celebration. And culture itself, when we look at culture, culture is the total way of life of a people, right? It's how they do everything on every level. It's how they comb their hair, how they walk, how they talk. And every people have their unique culture. But we as a people have been robbed of our true culture. And there are 7 principles, core principles of culture. And I try to say them right now as I recall them. You got 7 core principles of culture, which is a people's history, or their spirituality or religion, or moral ethics. Then you have their social organization, political organization, their economic organization, and then the 6th one is what's called creative production. And most people, we get trapped. We think that culture is our creative production. That's just the 6th principle. We think it's because our art, our literature, our fashion, and cuisine or cooking or whatever. We think that that's the have really been conditioned to think that that's the totality of culture. But all of that comes up under creative production. Then the sixth principle of the seventh principle of culture is ethos. That's the psychological orientation of a people and how they see themselves on the other six levels. So what I'm getting at, every people or all people have what's called a culture. And when a people are robbed of their culture and don't know their true culture, they are out of their minds. They are out of their minds. Just think of many brothers and sisters and think about that. They're out of their mind. And the reason why I say that people are out of their mind, because in a nutshell and in a very fundamental way, the culture of a people is really their mental and spiritual orientation. It's their mindset, because just think about what I said earlier. It's how they do everything, how they raise their children, how they organize themselves socially, how they organize themselves politically, how they organize themselves economically, their religious orientation, their spiritual orientation, their moral values, and the psychology of a people. That's a people's culture. That's their mentality. So every people has their culture. There's no such thing as a culture that fits all people. Take for instance, you look at people in China. They have their culture that's unique to them. It's their mindset. It's how they see themselves within their social organization, their political and economic organization. Is how they practice, how they raise their children, how they educate their children. That's their mindset. So taking that for an example and reflecting back on ourselves, when we look at our history or our experience in this country, and I'm just starting with the so-called Holocaust of enslavement, right? We were not slaves, we were enslaved. That's a big difference. And at this time, and on this episode, I won't even go into the facts, the evidence, and information that's available to us at this time, that the first so-called Americans were Africans, not the people that we call Native Americans. And we were here, African people, long before Columbus, long before the so-called slave trade. I mean, there's evidence that exists, documentation, artifacts, archaeological information, that at least 70 to 100,000 years ago, we were here. The first Americans were Africans. Let's say that for another episode, but that's just food for thought. It's just a thing. Even though I'm starting or saying something in reference to that Holocaust of enslavement that we call the so-called African slave trade and quote-unquote slavery, that experience, our minds were twisted. Our minds were twisted. We were robbed of our name, our true names in the languages, the mother tongues that we spoke. We were robbed of how we raised our children. We were robbed of our social organization, our economic organization, how we traded, how we bartered, how we practiced economics. We were robbed of that. We were robbed of our political structures and how we govern ourselves, how the tribes, the nations, and empires govern themselves, that were unique to us as a people based on who we are. And I know many of you may say, we all human. Yeah, we all may be human, but they are particular human beings based on their culture and their mental and spiritual orientation, their mind. That's what I'm talking about. That's what needs to be broken down. And that's what we're going to deal with under the name of Renew Your Mind. We're going to deal with all that and much, much more. Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the esoteric and metaphysical sciences that we call numerology, astrology, the tarot cards, and so forth and so on. And They are not pseudosciences. They were true science. Matter of fact, astrology is the mother of all science. I'm not talking about the horoscope that you may read in your daily newspaper. I'm not talking about that. Astrology is a science. It's a science. Numerology is a science. Because they're dealing with all these particular esoteric or metaphysical science. Esoteric, let me stop, pause for the cause. Esoteric, E-S-O-T-E-R-I-C. That word just simply means inner. E-S, inner. Spiritual. And you got another word, the opposite of that, exoteric, E-X. That means outer. That means outer. So when I say esoteric, I'm talking about within. Metaphysical, meta means beyond. So we beyond the physical. These are spiritual sciences. But when you look at in this Western hemisphere, those sciences like numerology, the tarot cards, astrology, palmistry, and so forth and so on, they've been defined incorrectly and falsely, not by accident, as being of the devil, of witchcraft, and so forth and so on. But no, those particular sciences, they give, when we understand them and know how to apply them, they give us greater insight and knowledge and wisdom and understanding on who we are as individuals. They help us to know who I am. What are my potentialities? What are some of my capabilities? And when we apply these methods and techniques, then we enhance our personal growth and development. We, in a sense, we be raised up in terms of knowledge, raised up in terms of consciousness, mentally, right back to that, renew your mind. You know, and most of you are familiar with a lot of the biblical verses and passages out of the book that we call the Bible, and where the character in the Bible, in the New Testament, called Lazarus. What did he say? He said, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus, come forth. He said, Lazarus, he's not dead. He just sleepeth. Lazarus was in a mental dead-like state, just like we are as a people, in a mental, spiritual dead-like state. We are not physically dead, but our consciousness has been twisted. And once again, most of us are in denial. We're in denial. We're in a mental grave in our consciousness. So the primary purpose, in a nutshell, of Renew Your Mind is to elevate and raise our consciousness, to renew the mind, to be born again mentally and spiritually. Because I know many of you probably remember, was that Funkadelic in the Parliament? You know, they said something to the effect that wherever the mind goes, the ass shall follow. You know, the body follows the mind. So if we don't have accurate knowledge and information in our mind, then the ass, the body, it just in disarray. It's just being a state of disorientation. Disorientated. We may think we're going east and we be going west. We think we're going north and we going south. But just in paraphrasing that, in honor of Dr. King, which is his so-called Earth Day or Soul Power Day, is coming up once again, January the 15th. One of his quotes is a direct quote. He said, "As long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free." That's a direct quote of Dr. King. As long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free. Take for a moment, and when you get time, research Steve Biko of South Africa. And this is a quote, just food for thought, that he said, and still relevant for today. Steve Biko said the most powerful, the most potent, or the most powerful weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Because if an oppressor has a person or people's mind, they got your allegiance. They got your body. They got your everything by having your mind. So in closing, brothers and sisters, renew your mind. This is what these series of episodes will be about. And at this time, I close out by saying, every shut eye isn't closed, and every goodbye isn't gone. The naked truth is always better than the best dressed lie. And finally, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe in anything simply because it is found written in your religious books. Do not believe in anything merely on the authority of your teachers and elders. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. But after observation, close observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason, logic, and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. Peace and love.